sky. To whom do these celestial steeds belong when you appear to us like gods on high? What brings you here to mystify?
Hi, and welcome to the Kate Valentine UFO Show, here with you live on 1160 WVNJ. Our guest today is Dr. Rita Louise. She is the co-author of Man-Made, the Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. Dr. Rita is also a medical intuitive, the host of Just Energy Radio, and the founder of the Institute of Applied Energetics, the author of 3 books, as well as hundreds of articles that have been published worldwide. We're honored to have her as our guest today. Welcome to the show, Dr. Rita.
Oh, thanks for having me, Kate. I'm just so thrilled to be here with you and your listeners.
Well, as I emailed you, I have just this week finished reading your book, which is Man-Made, the Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. Great book. It must have taken you forever to gather all the information that's in here.
Well, it was interesting. I mean, it did take a long time, but it wasn't one of those 20-year processes. Thank God. It just seemed like I would just follow a lead, and it would kind of lead me to this branch, and it would, flare out into a bunch of different areas, and I would just follow that branch until it came to an end, and then follow the next branch, and it just, I'll say, unfolded before me.
Is that synchronicity that we so often find in ufology. But I thought it best to, right off the bat, get rid of this little big G, little g type thing that you constantly discuss, because it's important to know who we're talking about here. So if you could just go over that with our audience, the big G versus the little G's.
Sure. And I try to find out who actually came up with that quote, or that usage of the big G, little g. Which I couldn't. I like to at least credit it to Giorgio Tsoukalos, who definitely likes to use that on the Ancient Alien Show and in other places. And, we all right, maybe if you're an atheist, not, but we all have a belief in God. That creator person who made the universe and is at the core of who we all are. And that belief is not a Judeo-Christian belief. I mean, it is found around the world. And so when we talk about that infinite, piece of potential, all-knowing, omnipotent presence, whether it's a person or an energy or a field of consciousness, that is who or what we are referring to, the big G God. And then there are the gods that we find in our literature, such as the God of the Bible, to a certain extent, the gods in India, the Greek gods, all of these other gods, and they all fall into that little G category. You want me to keep going?
No, that's fine. But it is important, too, because really when you start ascribing all these various characteristics of the little G guys, they seem much more human than sort of this all-encompassing big G, or this God that's been, I think, almost part of human psychology, that it almost seems to exist outside of ourselves, but that everyone's aware of it, and it's been tried to describe in so many different ways, and it's such an important part of so many religions that I really absolutely would not want to get into that. But the little G guys, I mean, they're pretty nasty. They've had some...
No kidding.
Oh, yeah. They've had some really all-out fights and, little triangles and, coming down as swans and all this other business. So, I mean, that, to me, would not be my idea of what an all-encompassing Godhead would be.
Well, I mean, and that's the part that one of the things that really got to me right up front was when we think of God, we think of this kind and loving benefactor who lives out there somewhere that's looking over us for our good. But when you read the stories that come out of mythology, they're all fighting with each other, having wars, having sex with each other's husbands and wives, and, conspiring against each other. And there isn't anything kind or loving that comes out of these stories.
Now, a pretty nasty crew. And what I like about them is they'll take one a group of humans and then pit them against another group of humans, and it's almost like they're having fun watching to see who's going to win. I can almost imagine them playing bets on these guys. And then when their team starts to lose, they'll beef them up with maybe here, try this weapon.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes, when you come into the more current myth, because I consider that a later myth when humans are involved, they
Right.
definitely work with people, us, like we're on a chessboard. It's like, rook to king's 3.
Mm-hmm. And he thought we liked him. But what I like too is that you categorize the little G's. You have them, like, for example, a Zeus character as the CEO, and then you have different department heads, like, the guy who's in charge of the oceans, one who's in charge of planting and sowing, and that's a pretty interesting concept.
Well, one of the things that we found is that when you start looking at mythology around the world, the gods you find the same guys. I don't know any other way to say it, but you just find the same guys. For example, the god of the waters, so when we think in Greek mythology, because I think everybody can relate to Greek mythology, we think of Poseidon, or Neptune, the guy with the big trident. But he was originally a fertility god. Well, when you look at fertility gods around the world, they're always associated with water. Many times they're associated with the creation of mankind. Many times they're also associated with the concept of being a trickster or doing things that aren't necessarily in alignment with the chief god. So you find these characteristics that are consistent across the board. Or when you're talking about the sky god or the god of war, he's always associated with lightning, an axe, or a hammer. Those, but most primarily lightning. And what's interesting is, we use these names, we use Zeus or, Enki or Enlil or, whatever culture you want to pick. But many times what I'm finding is that the name is more of a description of who they are versus their name. Like the name Gaia means earth. And then there's the god Ciclalique, who is an Aztec god, and her name means Earth Mother. So is that her name, or is that the name we gave her?
Another sort of a very small aside here is I think what makes it difficult to follow is that it's not always possible to memorize these names. I think if they were called, Mary or John or Smith, something like that, it's easier to follow. But especially when it comes to the Indian gods or goddesses, those names are almost unpronounceable.
No, they are unpronounceable.
Yeah. And it's a shame in a way because other than Vishnu, which is fairly, relative for this culture anyway, is fairly easy to pronounce, their stories match up so well with all of our ancient myths. Mm-hmm. And that's your point in the book, and I should really bring this out to the listenership too, is that you don't just simply go over the ancient aliens, as it were, but you tie it in with different times of not only evolution, but also the Earth's evolution, like different eras of time, like Jurassic and all those other ones, all the other times, like the Great Flood, for example, you tie in with the myths. And there's definite changes on this planet that seem to be reflected in the changes in the mythology.
Right, and I definitely agree with you. I mean, one of the things that we found in looking at the myths, or one of the things that was our requirement in including mythology or considering it for this timeline, and this was just our decision, was that we needed to find comparable myths in other locations. So if there was a Greek myth or a Sumerian myth that were telling the same story, that's interesting. But if we found the same narrative coming out of Australia, or if we found the same narrative coming out of the Americas, that gave it credibility. It definitely gave it credibility. One of the things, this is what got us started on this whole thing. And I mean, there's a pre-story, but this is, I think, the key piece here. For some reason, I decided to look at flood myths because I knew that there were, at the time, I thought there were 250. I've been corrected. There are 500 to 600 flood myths that appear around the world.
Huh.
When you survey those myths, you can summarize. I mean, this is the part that's scary. You can summarize the myth narrative into basically one paragraph. And that paragraph says, there was a pious, virtuous, or righteous man who is warned of an impending flood. He builds an ark, digs a canoe, climbs on a raft, climbs to the top of a tree, climbs to the top of a mountain. He is surviving the flood with his wife, his brother. There might be a couple of kids involved. In some of the stories, animals get on the boat. In some of the stories, animals climb to the top of the mountain. And in a few of the stories, animals are actually released or sent out to go see if dry land has survived. The interesting part, I mean, other than they're all the same, the interesting part is that even in the Americas, you find a variety of those different narratives. Some of them climb the tree, some of them climb the mountain, some of them make a boat. So it's not, well, in Europe, they all make a boat. And in the Americas, they all climb the mountain. I mean, there's not any geographical distribution of these stories, which to me says they're all telling the same story.
I have to agree with you, especially when it comes to the flood mythology. That seems so consistent, so worldwide. Something had to have happened. But anyway, I have to take a quick break. Kate Valentine here. I'm speaking with Dr. Rita Louise. She is the co-author of Man-Made, the Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. If you have questions or comments about this intriguing view of our collective past, please post them now on our website, AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. After the show, you can go to Dr. Rita's website, RitaLouise.com, for much more information and for a copy of this book about our ancient tales. We'll be right back. Hi, welcome back to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ today. Our guest today is Dr. Rita Louise. She is the author of Man-Made, the Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. Interestingly, it places side by side current scientific discoveries alongside contemporary myths with astounding results, which it certainly does, Dr. Rita. I mean, it was a fascinating book. It was hard to make up a list of questions for you because every time I turned a page, whoop, another question. But one of the things I wanted to make clear was that these little g gods were actually not human. And that's a very important differentiation, because if they were just some well-placed king or hero, that would be a different thing. But these were definitely not human.
Well, one of the things which we're already working on a revised and expanded edition, because there's just more information just keeps coming up that supports our argument. And one of the things that I took a long, hard look at is the authorship of the myth.
Oh.
Because there is a very, when you read something, it always comes through the writer's eyes.
Mm-hmm.
The narrative comes through the writer's eyes. And when you read these ancient myths, the writer seems very comfortable. I mean, with the gods being so notorious and so basically bad.
Yeah.
Where we look at them and go, God, that was really bad. But why would we, if we're venerating these gods and think they're great, kind of write such nasty stories about them?
That's a great point. I hadn't thought about that. Because those stories have to start somewhere. You're right. So who starts to make up a character like Zeus, if not Zeus himself?
Well, I mean, we believe that the stories that we've inherited, especially pre-flood, were actually taught to us by the gods. I mean, there are many, many stories that have come down, legends that have come down of the gods either teaching us the stories, I mean, they taught us everything else, how to make fire, how to do this, how to make agriculture, how to work with metal. Why not teach us our history?
And you think they sort of did that, though?
I do, and I think that's why the perspective comes from that position, because that's the story we were told. I did this, and, this guy did this, and then there was this great war. Sitting around the campfire with the gods, I think it would be kind of fun.
I guess so, but they did have a lot of wars.
They were constantly fighting. Constantly. And they were always vying for control and power and supremacy. One of the things that we talked about briefly in the book, and you're a UFO show, so I bet you'll like this part.
Okay.
Was that it was very challenging to tell if we were talking about one group of extraterrestrials or multiple groups of extraterrestrials, because there is this constant battle for control. And so were these wars fought for supremacy? Did a different group come in and vie for power and win, as in the case of Zeus?
But, and then they, how I'm trying to figure out this point. But even though they were not human, it seems as if we adopted a lot of their characteristics. I mean, certainly today, vying for power is not unheard of.
I just like to say, do as I say, not as I do.
Oh, okay.
Well, they gave us laws. I mean, we know, or at least from Jewish tradition, we know that God gave Moses a set of laws to live by after the flood. They're the Noetic laws. They've been around for forever. Hammurabi's laws were based on the Noetic laws. And so even if we place a date of the flood, whenever that was specifically, we were given these laws to live by and control us, and we're supposed to be good, righteous people. But we act more like the gods.
I see. So they anticipated our behavior, and in that anticipation gave us rules to control it.
Well, one of the things that it seems clear from mythology is that in their created races, or in their subservient races, they expected submission. They expected, to be able to run the show and have our obedience.
Well, nothing like a bolt of lightning to, enforce that particular. Wow, really. It gets to be a very interesting concept. A lot of the discussions on UFOs and aliens will place them in the interdimensional, ethereal type category, something of this nature. But we're talking about real flesh and blood aliens here that have real psychologies, real, their own way of doing things. And they're, they're just sort of, there's so many myths about humans being created to serve the gods that when they created, if that should be the case, if they created a living being to serve them, I guess they didn't take some of the more aggressive tendencies out of that creation.
Well, I mean, but they were just as aggressive also.
Yeah.
We have battled the interdimensional being idea and don't totally negate it. We just, my thought is, a ghost is a ghost, and it's a being without a body, and so whether these gods were beings without bodies that could make themselves be seen by us or not is really kind of a moot point.
Yeah. Just quick break. Kate Valentine here with Dr. Rita Louise on 1160 WVNJ. Yeah, it is a moot point. It really is. And I sort of hate to get into that because it's difficult enough to tie down extraterrestrials, much less bring in all these other potential explanations.
And when you read the mythology, there are never, or at least I have not found, any comments about them disappearing. There are comments about them changing form. There are comments about, and I was just reading this Norse mythology book where they talk about Loki putting on the feathered cloak of Freya, and he could soar across the earth in order to get to whatever location he was wanting to go to.
You know, you're right. There was never any description of the gods leaving.
No, I mean, they never left, but, that's a subject I don't even want to touch. But they also don't ever talk about them disappearing. Like they were there and now they're gone.
Wow, yeah. I mean, they could still be with us. Maybe that's what UFOs are all about. Wow. That's a thought I never even thought about.
Well, one of the things that we came to the, at least, general conclusion, even though we haven't, in our minds gone, this is it, but we feel like the gods actually had issues existing on the surface of the earth, which is why you find the gods in the sky. You're going to love this. It's why you find the gods living in underground domains, and it's why you find the gods living in domains that are deep within the waters. Now think about it.
Okay.
Where do you see all the UFO activities coming from?
In those three places.
In those three places.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And so while I'm not a UFO guru, the ties are just
really.
haunting.
So if we went to the top of Olympus at this point, maybe we could get in touch with these benefactors or not benefactors. Wow, interesting. Very interesting point. That's something new.
Well, and when, they talked about Olympus, when we think of where God lives, from a Western tradition, we think of heaven. That's the home of the gods, or God, period. Sometimes with a big G.
Okay.
But in Greek tradition, Zeus lived in Olympus. And the different Indian gods lived in things that were called sabas. But what's interesting is when they describe where they existed, it's like, well, it was on the top of Mount Olympus, but it was higher up than birds could reach.
Oh.
And one of the things that I had uncovered, which I thought was fascinating, these Indian sabas, the smallest one, and I'm kind of talking off the cuff here, and I'll just make it be in English as opposed to their measurement system.
Thank you.
Well, I usually convert it, but for ease of conversation, they were something like 100 by 300 miles in length and breadth.
Oh, whoa.
I mean, we're talking mothership.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, they were huge.
Huh. And that's where they lived.
And that's where they lived. And they would take their fiery chariots or whatever and, come back and forth from the earth via their vehicles.
Huh. I think we almost have created a modern myth with science fiction. It sounds almost, like people nowadays, if you say mothership and transports and so on, they sort of get an instant mental image of that. So maybe that sci-fi is now our mythology.
Well, I hope not, but but at least we have that to cling to. Where 5,000 years ago, or more than that, 7,000 years ago, when civilization was first emerging, they didn't even have ballpoint pens. But to imagine these fiery chariots and these weapons that could, this is one of my favorite words, smote their enemies and level mountains and do these things that today we can imagine the technology.
Yeah.
But back then, where they barely have agriculture.
It's hard. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, wow.
But to say that it was their imagination,
I don't think so. I think it's so outside of their everyday that it would take quite an imagination But I think something actually was going on. I agree with you. Other than, just plowing fields and then, turning the plowshares into swords and leveling mountains with them. I don't think that was going on. But we're going to take a quick commercial break. Kate Valentine here. I'm speaking with Dr. Rita Louise. She is the co-author of Man-Made, the Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. If you have questions or comments, please post them now on our website, AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. After the show, you can go to Dr. Rita's website, RitaLouise.com, and be able to get a copy of this really fascinating book there, as well as find out a lot more information about the extraterrestrial gods. Hi, welcome back to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ. Our guest today is Dr. Rita Louise. She has written a most fascinating book, Man-Made, the Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. Over the break, we had an interesting question that came in from Dave. He was wondering if you have a theory as to where these gods originally came from.
Well, based on mythology, there are 4 different star systems that seem to come up over and over again.
Really?
Yeah, it's interesting. One is Sirius, the dog star.
Okay.
One is the Pleiades.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is the North Star, Big Dipper,
mm-hmm.
and Orion. And so it's from those 4 areas that, if they're going to talk about the stars, those are the ones that they always reference. Never Cassiopeia or anybody else, just those 4 stars or star groups. Which again leads you to the, postulation of, are we really talking about multiple groups? That maybe a group came from the Pleiades, maybe a group came from Sirius.
Well, it seems, though, that most of the reports we get from various ufologists would agree with that. They think that there are multiple alien groups here. And it's hard for us to imagine why they would come here. But I think there's a lot of compelling reasons for them to have been here. To me, the hallmark of intelligence is curiosity, and certainly we as a people will soon become UFOs to other habitable worlds, and so I can't imagine why other habitable worlds wouldn't want to come here just to see what's going on. And I don't think necessarily to become, although it did seem pretty mean if they just came here to be gods, I mean, it did. But what I wanted to get into too is another very interesting point that you bring up, is that in these battles between the gods, there were the gods of the heaven and the gods of the underworld, and that has maintained itself in today's religions as to heaven being the good place and hell being the bad place. And you seem to feel that that's a reflection of these ancient wars.
I do. With the generalized comment being, what if the other guys won? I mean, I do believe that the underground world was inhabited, and I'm going to use a modern UFO word, by reptilians. I mean, these gods are often depicted as being half man, half snake, half man, half fish, half man, half crocodile, some reptile-type creature. Mm-hmm. Which would lead you come into more modern times where we associate, a snake with the devil, and where's hell? It's down there. But they were the losers in the battle. And I'm going to use Greek mythology again, when you talk about this big war, at one point in time, Kronos was in charge of the earth. Well, Kronos was a fertility god who's associated with the water. If you think about him in more contemporary times, he was half man, half fish. Okay, we'll just put it that way. He was half man, half fish. And, and then Zeus came in and battled him for control. And that's where I really had the biggest question was group Zeus actually his son, or was Zeus actually an invading group that were fighting for control? Ultimately, Zeus wins, and Kronos gets thrown into the pits of Tartarus for 1,000 years, along with all of his cronies. And that piece of mythology follows along everywhere. And the question I always ask is, well, what if the other guys won? What if Kronos won? Would we still be looking up to the sky, to God?
It's an interesting question, because I think of all the world's religions today, heaven seems to be, or the sky seems to be the good place to go.
But that's because that group won.
And as you say, history's written by the victors, and that's so true. The other point, too, that you bring up, and I thought was most fascinating, was that there have been genetic changes in human DNA that correspond to changes in our history. The most dramatic one being about 5,000 years ago, when the Sumerian-type civilization started to crop up. And that's amazing. And then you say, well, maybe was that just to make us better servants to these gods? Wow, that's a mighty point.
Well, and in more recent history, because this book goes back basically to the formation of the planet. But in more recently, there have been some very specific genetic modifications that have happened in the last 40,000 years. Some of it made us, or the manifestation, there was a genetic change, and then boom, we have Cro-Magnon Man, and he's painting in caves. It's the first time that we really have three-dimensional art appearing, and that kind of art. But along with that was the evolution of more society and culture, and there were so many things that started happening. Weaponry improved, we started wearing clothes, we started making bread. All of these things happened long before the Egyptians ever showed up.
Yeah.
But then there were some other genes that have happened that, around 5,000 years ago, there was another genetic manipulation that came into the population, and that happened, obviously, right with the rise of all of these great ancient cultures.
There's just so much in our history that's unknown, isn't there? But that is an actual fact.
That is an actual fact.
Kate Valentine here, speaking to Dr. Rita Louise, 1160 WVNJ. And it makes you wonder, really, was it just happenstance, or was it planned, or very fast? But that was a great point. I really enjoyed that, because you're right. It was the, how would you say, not so much intelligence, but ability to form a society. But that society sort of reflected the God society, too. A head, department heads, military, farmers, always those 12 people, the farmers, the medical people, the military, and that whole group. Wow. Pretty interesting stuff.
There's that piece, which, is it the chicken or the egg?
Yeah.
Hard to tell. But then you start looking at some other pieces of information that come out of that period, and there are like swells, and then, I can't think of the other word, but there are little waves of things happening. And I think some of my favorite is when we really start talking about domesticated animals. Now, not counting the dog, most animals became domesticated somewhere between 8,000 BC and 2,500 BC. So any animal that we know now as a domestic animal was domesticated during that time frame around the world.
Around the world. See, that's
around the world.
At the same time around the world, yeah.
And after that time, we have not figured out how to do it again.
There have been some recent developments in genetics, but even those seem to be almost a dead-end type thing. But then you bring up a really unsettling point, and I think it's been, brought up by other authors as well, is man the ultimate domesticated animal?
Well, a lot of people like to use that we were a slave species, and I kind of disagree with, well, other than the harshness of that. When someone is a slave, there is an assumption that they are less than you.
Right.
When we look at our dog, it's our dog.
Right.
We can love our dog, but still be the master.
Correct.
And I feel like that was more our relationship with these ancient gods versus they made us and they're just like whooping us in the cotton fields.
Right.
I just don't get that.
Well, there's all that thing, and that was another point you brought up that I thought was interesting as well. And they were, originally humans were made to mine gold. I mean, that seems to be another recurring theme. And as you say, why is gold so valuable? I mean, it's a nice thing, but again, all throughout all cultures, gold is like the ultimate standard, the gold standard.
And actually, I didn't say that in the book, just to be clear. That's okay,
Sorry.
But there are a lot of people that do, and, that was one of my assumptions. I was getting to the part where they got to the planet, and, and they're here to mine gold, because that's what everybody said. And I have to tell you something, Kate. This is a true story. I literally spent a solid month, 10 to 12 hours a day, online, searching for the gold.
Really?
And I could not find it.
Huh.
And there were a few myths that linked gold to immortality. In the Americas, they talk about gold being the excrement of the gods, and there was actually the original El Dorado was a king who coated his body with gold. But if you think of gold, what value does it have? I mean, it looks pretty.
Right.
But the only, in modern times, it's a great conductor and it's a great insulator of, ultraviolet radiation. Well, we were digging, one of the things was, another author, I'm not even going to say, talks about these ancient gold mines in South Africa. Well, I started digging into, I'm like, well, maybe I can find the mines. That would be good. I'll take anything right at this point in time.
Okay.
But I couldn't find them. But what I did find was all of these references to ochre. People covering their body with ochre. Some of the oldest mines in the world and the most heavily mined mines in the world are all ochre mines.
Huh.
In one of them, it's conservatively, and this is really conservatively dated at 43,000 BC, and there were hundreds of tons of ochre mined.
Wow.
Out of this South African mine. Same thing in Australia. Same thing in South America. These ancient, heavily mined ochre things. But what is ochre good for? You can paint a cave wall with ochre.
But that's not...
and that's about it. Make some pottery. I don't know.
Yeah.
But one of the things that many indigenous cultures still do is they coat their bodies with ochre, and it's a sign of beauty. It's a sign of prestige. But it's also like a sunscreen. It's kind of like putting zinc oxide on your nose. It's a sunscreen. And so one of the things that we postulated in the book was that they had issues with the sunlight, and they used the gold to coat their bodies, which could have been the tie to immortality, because without it, they would certainly die. And we, in emulation, coated our bodies with the ochre. But the gold was reserved for the gods, and so that's why we value it, because it was important to them.
Wow. I just wish we had a time machine able to go back and find out what was really going on. Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Actually, there isn't I don't want to say there isn't a day go by, but kind of like that I wish the libraries of Alexandria still existed, or they could find some of those documents, like how they found the Nag Hammadi library. Yeah. or the Mayan document, anything. 'Cause I think the answers would be there.
Dream on, Dr. Rita, dream on.
Well, I can put out that good energy for it. Come on.
Okay. Everybody out there, go with you. Anyway, we have to take a quick commercial break. Kate Valentine, I'm speaking with Dr. Rita Louise. She is the co-author of Man-Made, the Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. Any comments or questions, please post them on our website right now. And after the show, you can go to Dr. Rita's website to find out how to get her very interesting book and find out more about this. That's ritalouise.com. Be right back. Hi, welcome back to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ. Our guest today is Dr. Rita Louise. She has written Man-Made, the Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. It places side by side current scientific discoveries alongside contemporary myths with astounding results. That certainly is a great summary of your book. We had two interesting questions that came up over the break. Earl was writing about Mars, and he was wondering if there was any theories about the gods coming from there.
Well, interesting that I'm like, did he read the book?
No, not yet, but he will.
One of the things that, and there's a whole long thing that we talk about in the book, but yes, in a nutshell, we do believe that the original habitation of these extraterrestrial gods was on Mars, and that during the late heavy bombardment period of about 4.3 billion years ago, the planet became unstable, and it lost its atmosphere, and so they had to leave that planet, and thus they came to Earth. And one of the things that we find in mythology is they talk about the gods being on a dark planet or a semi-dark planet. But when they come to the Earth, I think that's why they needed the ochre or the gold, because it was too close to the sun, too sunny. It was too sunny. Yes, that was our thought. Okay,
well, that's interesting, because there's so much stories about that now going on, that there was some ancient colonies on Mars, and that was the whole point of your book. A lot of this mythology is starting to be shown to be the truth as time goes by and we make more discoveries.
Well, and that's the part I am just so grateful for. We wanted to do the book, we did the book. But what we're finding is that it really is validating much of what they're finding, which, it's like I want to pat myself on the back because you don't know necessarily what you're going to come out with when you go into a project like this.
Well, I think a lot of the assumption is because some of the earlier human settlements did not have technology, that these people were not too bright, whereas the intelligence, I'm sure, was comparable to today's intelligence, and they just did not have the technology that we have. And really, our technology is only from the last 100 years or so. Prior to that, we were pretty much a rural society here.
Right, but the gods had all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And actually, I was just reading an article that someone had posted. All right, they posted it on Facebook, but it was out of some journal where they have just found another piece of. I don't remember exactly what they found, but it was in a piece of coal.
Oh yeah, that was the. It was a gear made out of an aluminum. Yeah, a 300 million year old piece of coal with this aluminum gear shaft in it.
And in our book, we talk about the first inhabitants of the Earth coming here to do some terraforming on the planet. And we date them back at 4.2 to 3.8 billion years. So finding something that is dating to 300 million years ago, really doesn't surprise me.
And that's not the first time. They have also found in a comparable piece of gold a manufactured gold chain, not one that was wrought by hand, but absolutely, like you'd get today in any jeweler's store. And Michael Cremo wrote about that in Forbidden Archaeology, and which I'm sure you're familiar with. And there's been all sorts of finds like that. So, and you could have had an ancient civilization 300 million years ago that was completely destroyed by a flood, as the mythologies say. The gods were unhappy with what they created, so whoosh, wipe them out, start over with someone that they liked, right? And
exactly.
Yeah, and well, Dale wrote in too. He was wondering, were the Sumerians brought here to advance man at the behest of others and then destroyed by those who sent them? Well, yeah. That's what a great flood's all about, right?
But I don't think it was just the Sumerians. I mean, a big part of it is when you date the flood.
Okay.
I mean, that really becomes the key issue, and no one's really found the flood in the geological record. They haven't. But you find flood stories in Australia, which was settled, conservatively 50,000 years ago. You find it in the Americas, which conservatively 12,000 years ago. And so if it wasn't the gods telling us these stories at a later date, then the flood had to precede these people. And if it was just the Sumerians that were here, how did they, as this one Spanish writer, in the 1500s, it's like, how could they know about the flood,
Yeah. Well, it was worldwide, and I think you're quite right. But, you're right. It seems like mythology tells us that there was this huge flood. I mean, it's in the Bible, it's in all various religions, it's in all various mythologies. But you're right, there doesn't seem to be any geological record of it, that I know of, anyway.
I mean, everybody wants to put it, 11,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, but I would think, question mark, that there would be something.
Yeah, like sediment in rocks or whatever. Yeah, you would think so, or some changes someplace. But anyway, to sum it all up, though, I think I love the very last line in your book, and I'm going to... Here it is. Humanity, when looked at through the lens of mythology, seems less a product of chance and circumstances and more like you, me, all of us have been man-made. Great quote.
Thank you. I made it up myself.
Wow, very, very well. So, but you're pretty convinced, though, that there were some extraterrestrial beings that came here and sort of had a great influence on this planet, and that may still be with us.
I just can't really see any way around it. It's kind of like reincarnation. Your mind goes, well, I don't know. But the evidence, there's so much evidence that you can't just out and dismiss it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, as far as that goes, my father, I think, had the last word. He said, we're all dying to find out. So, but, I would love to have a time machine to go back. And I know you mentioned Orion before, and that in the belt there are stars that are being formed as we look at them, but with light years, and the telescope being a time machine, those planets or stars or whatever have already formed. And it would be great if they had somehow a video machine of this planet that we could go to and then just have them play back our 4 billion year history.
That would be cool. A Wayback Machine.
Yeah, well, I would love it. I wonder if that won't be in our future sometime. It seems like technology is going so rapidly at this point.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to throw this out, and this is just total, food thought.
Okay.
We keep, they say that the technology that we are achieving now or getting now, comes from us reverse engineering alien crafts and et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
But could it be, and this is just totally could it be, that they're really not accidentally crashing, that they're kind of dumping it down there and giving it to us?
Other people have speculated on that, and they said that actually it was an act of altruism that these bodies that crashed in Roswell did it on purpose so that we could back engineer this to help us out of the morass that we seem to be getting ourselves in. Well, I'm sorry, that music means we've come right to the end of the hour. Dr. Rita Louise, how can our listeners find out more about your book and your work?
Well, the best way to find me is go to my main website, which is www.soulhealer.com. That's SOULHEALER.com, and it is the gateway to everything Dr. Rita.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. A great